I never thought my wedding day would feel like a warning. People talk about butterflies in the stomach, nerves, the thrill of finally binding yourself to another soul. But mine was different. My nerves weren't from excitement. They were from the way her family stared at me, unblinking, as though they were measuring how much of me belonged to her now, and how much would have to be reshaped to belong to them. The ceremony took place in their family's ancestral church, though calling it a church might be generous. It was a squat stone building, half sinking into the soil at the edge of their property, its roof warped with age, the steeple leaning as if trying to whisper to the earth. The pews smelled of mildew and wax, and the walls were lined with portraits of men and women whose eyes seemed alive, each gaze following me wherever I stood. My bride looked radiant. Yes, but not in the way of brides I had seen before. She wasn't trembling or smiling or crying. She stood still, calm, as though she had been through this ceremony 1,000 times in her bloodline. The veil over her face didn't shake. Even her fingers, laced with mine, were steady and cold, not from fear, but from something deeper. It felt like she knew what was coming. The priest was her uncle, or so they said, though he looked more like some relic that had been dug out of the stone itself. Gaunt, eyes sunk deep, lips pale as though they hadn't tasted sunlight in decades. His voice when he spoke was gravel and smoke, each word echoing strangely, not just through the walls, but inside my chest. He spoke of union, yes, but not the kind of union that joins two people. His words tangled us with the family, with the house, with the rules they never explained. When it came time for vows, mine stumbled out like anyone else's would. Love, loyalty, through sickness and health. But hers were whispered. I couldn't catch them all, though the way her lips shaped words I didn't know made my skin crawl. Her relatives leaned forward, eager to hear, their faces twitching in approval as though she had promised something far more binding than fidelity. She said something about silence when the house groaned, about patience when the shadows moved, about loyalty not just to me, but to all of them. The priest nodded when she finished, a slow, almost predatory nod. "So it is sealed," he murmured. And with that, the church felt colder, as if some draft had slithered through the cracks in the stone and wrapped around my neck. The reception was not much better. Their estate sat just beyond the church, a massive looming house with windows like watchful eyes. The inside was suffocating with old wood, dust, and heavy drapes that let almost no sunlight in. Candles burned everywhere, though they didn't so much illuminate the rooms as deepen the shadows. Every corner seemed to have someone lurking, cousins, aunts, distant relatives whose names I couldn't keep straight. They all dressed in muted, near-identical clothing, and none of them laughed. Not once. I tried to make conversation. "Beautiful place," I offered to one of her brothers as we stood near a table of food that looked like it had been prepared in another century. Cold meats, hard bread, bowls of something unrecognizable. He just stared at me for a long moment, then said, "It keeps us." And that was all. No smile, no explanation. Every time I glanced at my new wife, she was surrounded by family. They spoke to her in low voices, sometimes glancing my way as though checking to see if I was watching. She never looked back at me, not even once, as though her duty was with them before it was with me. Later, when it came time for the dance, no music played. Instead, they formed a circle around us, humming something deep and monotonous. Their voices weren't in harmony. They were discordant, unsettling, like the sound of insects buzzing inside a wall. We moved in slow steps, her hand still cold in mine, her eyes fixed on mine but unreadable. It didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a ritual, and I was the unwilling centerpiece. I thought maybe it was just their way, strange, insular traditions. But then I noticed something that made my chest tighten. Every portrait on the walls of the reception hall, every single one had been of a couple. A bride and groom painted in shades that looked more like bruises than colors. And in each painting, the bride's eyes gleamed brighter, while the groom's looked hollow, sunken, as if drained. As night crept on, the family grew quieter, though their eyes never softened. When it was time to leave for the bedroom prepared for us, they lined the hall, watching, whispering words I couldn't hear. My wife led me by the hand, her grip firm, almost too firm, as though she feared I might run. At the door, her father placed his hand on my shoulder. His fingers were heavy, calloused, and the look in his eyes was not congratulatory. It was warning. "You're one of us now," he said. His voice was low, but every syllable carried weight. Remember that. That night, as I lay beside my bride, the house creaked and groaned like something alive. I couldn't sleep. She drifted quickly, her breathing even, her face peaceful in a way that seemed unnatural. I stared at the ceiling, the shadows stretching, deepening, until it felt like they leaned down toward me. And somewhere in the silence, I thought I heard it, a whisper, faint and rasping, not from her lips but from the walls themselves. Bound. I told myself it was just nerves, exhaustion from the day, the strangeness of marrying into a family so unlike my own. But deep inside I knew the truth. This wasn't just a marriage, this was a binding, and whatever I had promised, whatever she had whispered in that church, I had no idea what it truly meant, or what it would cost me. The first time I saw the house in daylight, I realized it wasn't just a building. It was a wound on the land. The estate stood on the far edge of miles of withered farmland, fields gone fallow long ago. The soil was grey, cracked in places, and no birds sang over it. Even the wind seemed reluctant to pass through, slipping by in uneasy gusts that rattled the dead stalks like brittle bones. And there, rising out of the earth like a tumor, was the house that would now be mine. If mine even meant anything anymore. It was bigger than I expected. Photographs had never done it justice. The architecture didn't fit one style. It was as if generations had kept adding onto it. Wings upon wings, each with its own sagging roof lines, its own misaligned windows, and walls that leaned just slightly wrong. It was both sprawling and suffocating, every angle off, every corner too dark. It wasn't a home, it was a labyrinth. When we arrived after the wedding night, my wife didn't hesitate. She moved with purpose, her hand still holding mine as though guiding me not with affection but with control. The gates were iron, twisted into shapes that suggested thorns, though none of them were symmetrical. They screeched as they opened, the sound clawing through my ears and vibrating in my teeth. Inside, the grounds were choked with weeds and brambles. A fountain sat in the center, dry for years. The stone figures eroded so badly their faces looked melted. The driveway curved like a tongue leading us into the mouth of something alive. I tried to mask my discomfort, tried to convince myself that this was just old-world charm, the sort of estate a family clung to for history's sake. But the truth gnawed at me. It didn't feel like they were preserving history. It felt like the house was preserving them. Crossing the threshold was like entering another world. The air grew heavier instantly, thicker, as though carrying centuries of breath that had never left. The scent was a mix of damp wood, wax, and something sour that lingered at the back of the throat. Every board groaned underfoot, not just in protest, but in recognition. Portraits lined the foyer walls. They stretched from the floor to the ceiling, some as tall as doorways, their frames ornate but tarnished. The faces stared down at me, generations of the family captured in oil and canvas. What struck me was not the artistry, but the sameness. The same sharp cheekbones, the same cold eyes, the same grim expressions. Each bride, each groom, staring as though they knew me already, as though I was not the first outsider to cross this threshold. My wife's mother met us at the door. Her eyes darted to my face, searching, though I couldn't tell for what. Approval? Doubt? Or maybe weakness? She smiled, but the smile was tight, forced, like pulling skin over bone. "Welcome," she said softly. "The house has been waiting." I wanted to laugh, to shake off the unease, but the way she said it, not "we've been waiting," not "your room has been prepared," but "the house has been waiting." It froze me, as if this structure itself was the host, and we were only guests in its body. We were led to what they called our wing. The hallway stretched far too long, each step echoing into the next. The wallpaper peeled in places, revealing older layers beneath. darker patterns that seemed to writhe when caught by candlelight. The windows were tall and narrow, but the drapes were pulled tight, suffocating the sunlight. It was morning outside, but inside the house it could have been midnight. Our bedroom was cavernous, the kind of space that made you feel smaller the longer you looked at it. A canopy bed stood in the center, draped in heavy curtains that smelled faintly of dust and old perfume. At the far wall, a fireplace loomed, though the hearth was cold. Above it hung another portrait, this one of a bride whose face had been scratched away, leaving only her husband's hollow stare. I set my bag down, the sound far too loud in the silence. My wife sat on the edge of the bed, her posture straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't look at me. She looked at the door. "What do you think?" she asked finally. I swallowed, trying to find words that wouldn't sound foolish. "It's bigger than I imagined." Her lips curved slightly, though it wasn't amusement. "You'll get used to it, that was all. Nothing more. No attempt to ease me, no tenderness in the words. Just a statement, as if adaptation was my only choice. Later, as I explored, I noticed the peculiarities. Every clock in the house ticked, but none of them matched. Their hands spun at different paces, some ahead, some behind, as though time itself bent differently in each room. Doors didn't align with where they should have led. A hallway on the second floor took me back to where I started, though I had walked straight. Staircases leaned, pulling at my balance, and always the house groaned. Not just with settling wood or shifting foundations. It groaned like something alive, the sound resonating deep in the walls, as though it exhaled when you passed. That first evening, her family gathered for supper in a long dining hall. The table stretched endlessly, candles burning along its length, flames bending toward one another as if whispering secrets. The food was bland, heavy, but no one complained. No one even spoke much. They watched me instead, utensils clinking softly as though marking time. I tried again to be polite. "It's a remarkable house," I said. "How long has it been in your family?" Her father, seated at the head, set his fork down. His eyes pinned me. "Longer than we can remember," he said. "It doesn't matter when it began. Only that it endures." His words silenced me. Endures. The way he said it wasn't pride. It was obligation. When the meal ended, I rose with the others, but I noticed something strange. No one had touched the salt that sat at each place setting. It wasn't decorative, it was deliberate. Bowls of it, untouched, as though there for another reason entirely. That night I tried to rest. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the deep groans of the house. My wife slept soundlessly again, too soundlessly, as though she belonged to the silence. I lay awake, staring at the canopy above, until I swore I saw shapes moving along the fabric. Not shadows cast from anything real, but shadows that bent on their own, crawling like insects across the cloth. I shut my eyes. But then came the sound, a whisper at the wall. Too soft to make out words, too insistent to ignore. I pressed my ear against the wood and it vibrated faintly, like something just beneath the surface was speaking through it. The words were muffled, slurred, but one came clear, drawn out with hunger. "Stay." I jerked back, heart hammering, and looked to my wife. Her eyes were open. She wasn't asleep. She was watching me. "You'll get used to it," she whispered again, and then she turned away, leaving me with the walls and their voices. The first time I heard about the rules, it wasn't from my wife. It wasn't from her parents either. It was slipped into conversation by one of the cousins, as though it was nothing more than a reminder to shut a gate or not track mud through the halls. It happened on the third day. I had been walking the hallways, trying to orient myself in the labyrinth of the house. Every turn seemed to bend back onto itself. Windows opened onto walls. Doors led to rooms that had no windows at all, only mirrors that reflected my confusion back at me. It felt like the house enjoyed watching me lose my way. I passed one of the cousins, a young man with narrow shoulders and skin so pale it was almost translucent. He stood by a window that looked out onto nothing but the decaying fields. His gaze lingered outside as though he expected something to rise out of the soil. When I nodded to him in greeting, he turned slowly. His lips parted, dry and cracked, and he said, "You didn't bow last night." I blinked at him, uncertain I'd heard right. "I didn't what?" His eyes narrowed. "When the house groaned, you stayed still. You didn't bow." There was no malice in his tone, but there was weight, judgment, as if I'd made a mistake that carried consequences I couldn't yet see. "I didn't know," I muttered. "No one told me." "Someone should have," he interrupted. His voice dropped lower. "They will." And then he turned back to the window, dismissing me, as though my ignorance no longer concerned him. That was the first whisper of the rules. Not written, not explained, but carried in fragments through the family like sacred truths. And I had already broken one without knowing. Later that evening, I asked my wife. We were seated in the bedroom, the only light a candle sputtering on the dresser. She was brushing her hair with long, slow strokes, each motion deliberate, her eyes fixed on the mirror instead of me. "Your cousin said something today," I began. "About bowing when the house groans. What does that mean?" She didn't stop brushing. She didn't even flinch. "It's just respect." "Respect for what?" I pressed. "The house," she said simply, as though it explained everything. I waited for her to laugh, to shrug it off as some silly old tradition. But she didn't. Her face remained calm, serious, her eyes cold in the mirror. "And if I don't?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She set the brush down and finally looked at me. "Then it notices." Her words sank into me like hooks. I wanted to demand clarity, but the way she said it, not angry, not mocking, but factual, stopped me. She wasn't warning me out of love. She was stating a reality, one I had already stepped into without understanding. From that night forward, I listened to the house differently. Every groan, every sigh of the boards, every whisper in the walls, I flinched. And when the sound deepened, like wood stretching in pain, I bowed my head. I didn't know if it mattered, but I didn't dare not try. The rules revealed themselves slowly, piece by piece, in conversations half heard or remarks casually dropped. They weren't written anywhere. They lived in the mouths of her family, passed down like blood. At supper, one of her uncles muttered to another, "No whistling after midnight. You'll call it." In the library, her grandmother scolded a child for letting the candle burn too low. Never let the flame die inside the house. It mustn't wake to darkness. I tried to keep track. I tried to understand. But the more rules I learned, the less sense they made. They contradicted each other sometimes. One cousin said, "Never go near the cellar." Another whispered that if the house moaned twice, you had to go to the cellar immediately and wait until it stopped. I asked my wife again, desperate for clarity. She was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling as though counting cracks in the plaster. "There are too many," I said. "How am I supposed to keep track of all of them?" She rolled her head toward me. "You're not supposed to keep track," she said softly. "You're supposed to listen." "To who?" I asked. Her eyes didn't blink. "To the house." The words unsettled me, but worse was the ease with which she said them, as though it was the most natural thing in the world to treat the house like a parent, like a god. The next night, I broke another rule without knowing. It was raining hard, the kind of rain that battered against the windows like fists. I couldn't sleep, so I wandered the hallway outside our bedroom. The candle in my hand flickered, throwing jagged shadows along the wallpaper. That was when I saw her brother at the far end of the hall. He was kneeling, head bowed, facing a wall where the wood was darker, almost swollen. His lips moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. I approached without thinking, curious, and in that moment, the candle flame sputtered and died. The darkness swallowed me, immediate and total. I froze, heart hammering, her brother's head whipped toward me. Even in the dark, I felt his stare. His voice was sharp, urgent. "Don't move. I stood trembling, blind, until he hissed again. "Strike it. Strike it now." My hands fumbled with the matches. I dropped one, cursed under my breath, and finally lit another. The flame flared to life, and with it came relief so sharp it was almost painful. When the candle burned steady again, her brother's face emerged in the glow. His skin was pale, his eyes wild. "Never let it go dark," he said, voice ragged. "Never." I wanted to ask why. I wanted to demand answers, but his expression silenced me. It wasn't fear of superstition, it was survival. The rules weren't just quirks, they weren't meaningless rituals. They were defenses. Against what, I still didn't know. But the family obeyed them with the kind of desperation you only see in people who've witnessed the cost of breaking them. And slowly, I realized, they expected me to obey too. Not because I was family by marriage, but because the house didn't care about bloodlines. It cared about presence. It noticed me. It had already noticed me. That night, lying awake, I thought about the words whispered in the church, the vows I never fully heard. Maybe she hadn't been marrying me at all. Maybe she had been binding me to the rules, and now, whether I understood them or not, whether I believed them or not, I had to follow. Because ignorance wasn't an excuse here. Ignorance was a death sentence. By the 4th week, I had stopped asking questions out loud. Every time I pushed too far, every time I pressed my wife or her family for explanations, I was met with silence that felt heavier than words. It wasn't ignorance, it was refusal. They knew more than they would ever tell me, and somehow the less I knew, the safer they seemed to think I was. But ignorance doesn't protect anyone for long. It was in the library that I found it, the first real evidence that the rules weren't just scattered warnings muttered under breath, that they had been written, at least once, in detail. The library was a cavern of old wood and dust. Shelves towered to the ceiling, the air thick with the smell of leather and mold. Most of the books were histories, some genealogies, others with spines cracked and titles faded to nothing. I'd taken to wandering there in the afternoons, pretending to read, but really searching for something, anything, that might explain the things no one would. That day, the rain poured hard outside. The sound beat against the tall windows like a drum, drowning the house's usual groans. I moved along the shelves, fingers trailing the spines, when one caught at me. Not by title, because it had none, but by touch. The leather was rougher, cracked deeper, as though it had been handled more than any other. I tugged it free. It was small, no larger than a journal, its cover blackened at the edges as though it had survived fire. When I opened it, the pages exhaled dust, brittle and yellowed. The writing inside was cramped, jagged, ink faded but legible. And there, written line after line, were the rules. Some I recognized. Bow when the house groans. Never whistle after midnight. Keep the flame alive. Others were new, chilling in their specificity. Do not look into the mirrors after sundown. If a door knocks and no one stands there, do not answer. It isn't for you. When the wind dies, cover your ears. It whispers lies when it's quiet enough to hear. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. There were dozens of them. Rules for times of day, rules for seasons, rules for things that might appear at the windows or scratch at the floors. Each one stranger than the last, each one written with the certainty of law. At the bottom of one page, a line had been underlined twice. The rules are not to be broken. They are to be survived. I don't know how long I stood there reading, the rain battering the windows, my heart hammering with each new revelation. It wasn't until the library door creaked that I realized I was no longer alone. Her father stood there. His face was pale, lips thin, eyes narrowing on the book in my hands. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he stepped forward, his boots striking the wood with heavy, deliberate sounds. "Where did you find that?" His voice was low, dangerous in its calm. "On the shelf," I stammered, clutching the book tighter. I needed to know." "You never explain." "You weren't meant to see it," he interrupted. His hand shot out, gripping the book, yanking it from my grasp with surprising strength. He snapped it shut and held it against his chest like a shield. My mouth was dry. "Why?" If these rules are so important, why not tell me? Why keep me in the dark? His eyes burned into mine. Because knowing doesn't save you. It damns you faster. The words sank like ice into my gut. I don't understand. You don't need to, he said sharply. Then softer, almost like a plea. You only need to obey. He turned to leave, book clutched to him. I felt a rush of desperation. But what if I break one without knowing? What if I already have? He stopped at the door. His back stiffened. Then pray it was a small one, he said. Pray it wasn't noticed. And then he was gone, the door shutting behind him with a finality that made my chest ache. I stood frozen in the silence of the library. My mind reeled, replaying the rules I had read, the ones I might have already broken. How many had I stumbled into by accident? How many whispers in the walls had been warnings I hadn't heeded? That night I couldn't rest. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my ears straining for every sound. The house creaked and shifted, but now each groan carried meaning. Every sigh of the walls might be a command. Every draft against my skin might be punishment creeping closer. And I realized something else. The rules weren't just random. They were a language, a way of surviving something far older than the family, something that lived in the bones of the house itself. But I had seen too much. Even if the book was taken, even if they tried to hide it from me again, I couldn't unsee what I had read. The rules were everywhere now, hovering at the edge of every shadow. And the more I thought about them, the more I feared her father was right. Knowing them wasn't safety. It was invitation. It happened sooner than I thought. For weeks I had tiptoed around the house like a prisoner afraid of setting off traps. I listened for the groans and bowed when I heard them. I kept candles burning even when the wax pooled dangerously. I silenced myself at midnight, even when restlessness clawed at me. I thought I was careful. I thought I was learning. But ignorance has a way of finding you. It was a storming night. The wind howled across the empty fields, rattling the shutters, making the house moan louder than usual. My wife slept beside me, her breathing calm, as if storms soothed her instead of unsettled her. I couldn't sleep. The air felt heavy, charged, as though the storm outside was seeping through the walls into the marrow of the house. I lit another candle when mine guttered out, careful not to let the room fall into darkness. I watched the flame shiver and thought about the rulebook I wasn't meant to see. The lines ran through my mind over and over. Do not look into the mirrors after sundown. That was the one I broke. I hadn't meant to, truly. But curiosity has a cruel pull, and fear often sharpens it. I had avoided the mirrors since I read that line, keeping my eyes averted whenever I passed one. But that night, with the storm outside and the house trembling around me, I felt something tug. The mirror across from our bed was tall, framed in black wood carved with strange symbols I couldn't recognize. Normally I kept it draped with a sheet. That night, though, the sheet had slipped down one corner, exposing part of the glass. And as the candlelight flickered, I thought I saw movement there. Not my movement. Not hers, something else. I should have turned away. I should have pulled the sheet back up. But instead I found myself rising from the bed, candle trembling in my hand, drawn toward it. At first, it was only my reflection, pale and wide-eyed, the flame wavering. But then the reflection shifted. My lips parted in the mirror, though I hadn't spoken. My reflection leaned closer, though I hadn't moved. And then, in a voice soft and rasping, my reflection whispered, "You don't belong here." The candle nearly slipped from my grasp. My chest seized, breath caught, as the reflection's eyes deepened, hollowing like pits. I stumbled back, but the reflection smiled. Not wide, not grotesque, just enough to let me know it wasn't me at all. I yanked the sheet back over the mirror, heart hammering, and sat on the edge of the bed, shaking. My wife stirred but didn't wake. Well, maybe she did, maybe she heard, maybe she chose to stay still. I'll never know. That night I barely slept, and when I did, it wasn't rest. I dreamed of standing before that mirror, my reflection gone. The glass filled instead with a dark room behind me, where shapes writhed in silence. By morning, I knew something had changed. The house knew. It began subtly at first. The boards creaked louder under my steps, as if announcing me to whatever listened in the walls. The groans came more frequently, deeper, and each time I bowed, I felt eyes on the back of my neck, judging if I was sincere enough. At supper, the family glanced at me more often. Whispers passed down the table, too soft to catch. My wife didn't speak at all. Her silence was worse than anything. That night, when we returned to our room, I saw something scratched into the wall above the mirror's sheet. Thin lines carved with something sharp. Seen. My stomach dropped. I asked her about it, desperate for some shred of comfort. I think I broke one, I whispered, pointing at the wall. She stared at the word for a long time. Then she turned to me, her face pale in the candlelight. "Don't ever say it out loud," she said. "But don't." Her voice was firm, sharp in a way I hadn't heard before. She extinguished the candle and climbed into bed. I was left standing there, staring at the carved word in the dim light, feeling the weight of being watched. That was the first night something scratched at our door. It began as a soft scrape, like nails dragging over the wood. Slow, deliberate. Then it grew louder, sharper, until it sounded like claws tearing at the surface. I froze, unable to move, heart racing in my chest. My wife lay still beside me, eyes shut, unmoving. "Do something," I whispered, though my voice shook. She didn't open her eyes. "Stay quiet. Don't answer." The scratching went on for hours. At times it stopped, replaced by the sound of breathing just beyond the door. Long, slow, rattling breaths. At one point, I swear I heard my own name whispered, drawn out in that rasping voice from the mirror. When dawn finally broke, the sound ceased. I stumbled to the door, exhaustion weighing me down, and saw the wood shredded, deep grooves etched into it. Too deep for fingernails, too uneven for knives. Something had been there. Something that wanted in. The family noticed the marks. They didn't ask how they got there. They only looked at me with eyes that said more than words ever could. That evening, her father pulled me aside. His grip on my arm was bruising, his voice low and shaking with fury. "You've been careless," I didn't deny it. My voice cracked. "What happens now?" He stared at me for a long time, his jaw tightening. "Now you follow every rule, every single one, or the house will decide you're not worth keeping." His words weren't a threat. They were a sentence. That night, I sat awake with candles burning all around me, bowing when the house groaned, flinching at every whisper. My wife slept, untouched, as though none of it touched her. But I knew. The first broken rule had marked me. The word "seen" carved into the wall was proof. The house had noticed me. And once it notices, it never forgets. The morning after the scratches, I was summoned. No one asked if I had slept. They didn't care. My wife's mother appeared at our door, face stern, lips pressed tight, and said only, "The elders want to see you." Her voice carried no choice in it. It was a command, as heavy as the house's groans. I followed her down a corridor I had never walked before. The air grew colder the deeper we went, the windows fewer, until there were none at all. Candles lined the hallway, each one guttering as we passed. Shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. At the end was a door unlike the others, heavy, iron-bound, carved with strange marks that looked less like art and more like warnings. She opened it and gestured me inside. The room was circular, low-ceilinged, lit by a single ring of candles set on a table at the center. Around it sat the elders, her father, her grandmother, 2 uncles, and an aunt, with eyes clouded white but sharp with awareness. Their faces were grave, their hands resting still as stone on the table. I stepped forward cautiously, the floor creaking beneath me. Her grandmother spoke first. Her voice was papery, brittle, yet carried weight. "You broke one. I didn't ask how they knew." There was no point. The scratches on my door were enough. The word carved above the mirror was enough. "I didn't mean to," I said. "I didn't know." Her father's eyes burned into mine. "Meaning doesn't matter. The house doesn't care about intent. Only obedience." The blind aunt leaned forward slightly. "It has seen you now." "That is dangerous." A chill crawled up my spine. "What does that mean?" No one answered immediately. They looked at one another, as if debating how much to reveal. Finally, one of the uncles spoke, his voice low, gravelly. "Once it sees you, it waits, watches, tests. It will draw you again and again to the rules you cannot keep. And when you fail, he let the words hang. When I fail what? I asked, desperate, the grandmother's clouded eyes fixed on me. It will claim you, piece by piece, until nothing of you remains but what it keeps. The silence that followed pressed in heavy, suffocating. I can't live like this, I whispered. My voice cracked, betraying the terror I tried to contain. There are too many rules, too many contradictions. How can anyone survive it? Her father leaned closer. His face was carved with exhaustion, but his voice was iron. We survive because we must. You survive because you married into us. Outsiders don't last unless they learn quickly. Faster than the house can unmake them. I shook my head. You should have told me. From the beginning. You should have warned me! The grandmother's voice cut through the air. Warnings make outsiders careless. Fear keeps them alive, I wanted to scream. To demand why I had been brought here. Why I had been bound into something I never agreed to. But the way they looked at me, not with hatred, not with pity, but with resignation, silenced me. They didn't see me as a man anymore. They saw me as an inevitable loss, a candle burning too close to the end of its wick. Finally, the blind aunt spoke again. Her voice softened, almost kind. There are still things you can do. Small things, acts of respect. They won't undo the breaking, but they can slow the watching. What things? I asked quickly, desperate for hope. She tilted her head, listening to something I couldn't hear. Kneel when the house groans, not just bow. Place salt at your doors. Burn cedar when you can. And never ever speak to your reflection again. My mouth went dry. What if it speaks first? Her milky eyes locked onto me. It will. And you must not answer. Her father rose, signaling the meeting was over. The others stayed seated, their eyes following me as though marking me for memory. As though they already suspected they would soon be speaking of me in the past tense. On the walk back, my wife's mother said nothing. Her silence was heavier than words. When we reached the room, she paused before leaving, her hand gripping the doorframe. Do not embarrass her, she murmured. It took me a moment to realize who she meant. Not herself, not even my wife. She meant the house. That night, I followed their instructions. I sprinkled salt across the doorway, the grains stark white against the dark wood. I bowed. No, I knelt, when the house groaned, pressing my forehead to the floor. I lit a bundle of cedar I found in a drawer and watched the smoke curl against the ceiling like pale fingers. But the mirror called to me. Even with the sheet pulled tight, I felt its pull. The weight of unseen eyes pressing from behind the glass, waiting, patient. At one point, I swear I heard my voice whisper from beneath the fabric, mimicking my breath, shaping words I hadn't spoken. I stuffed my ears with cloth and whispered prayers I hadn't said since childhood. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. By dawn, I understood the truth the elders hadn't said aloud. Their warnings weren't meant to save me. They were meant to buy me time. The house had seen me. The rules had marked me. And now, no matter what I did, it was only a matter of time before it decided how much of me it wanted to keep. The first time I saw them, I thought it was a trick of the storm. It had been raining all day, a steady downpour that soaked the fields until they glistened like black glass under the moonlight. By nightfall, the storm eased, leaving the air thick and heavy. The house was restless, its beams groaning as if straining against some unseen weight. I had been bowing, kneeling, obeying every sound for days now, terrified of slipping again. But the truth is, obedience doesn't matter once the house wants you. It was near midnight when I noticed the shift. The candlelight in our room seemed dimmer than usual, though the flame burned steady. My wife slept soundlessly, the sheet rising and falling with her calm breaths. I lay awake, nerves wired too tight, listening for the house's every complaint. That was when I heard it, a tapping at the window. Slow, deliberate, like knuckles rapping against the glass. I froze. The rules I had overheard came rushing back. If a door knocks and no one stands there, do not answer. But no one had ever mentioned windows. The tapping grew louder, sharper. I rose cautiously, candle in hand, and approached. The curtains were thick, moth-eaten velvet, and I pulled them back just enough to peek through. My breath caught in my throat. There, standing in the rain-soaked yard, were figures. Dozens of them. At first glance, they looked like people. Tall, thin shapes, unmoving. But the longer I stared, the less human they seemed. Their proportions were wrong, too long in the limbs, too narrow in the torsos. Their faces were pale ovals, blank, without features. Yet I knew they were looking at me. I felt it in my bones, like cold fingers brushing the back of my neck. They stood in a wide arc around the house, all facing the windows. Their bodies didn't shift, their heads didn't tilt. They only stared. The tapping came again, sharper now, directly against the glass in front of me. I jerked back, heart slamming against my ribs. There was nothing there, no hand, no stone. Just the steady sound of something unseen demanding to be let in. Behind me, my wife stirred. "Don't look," she murmured, voice thick with sleep. But I already had. The rules hadn't mentioned them. But instinct told me everything I needed to know. The watchers were not meant to be acknowledged. I stepped back from the window, pulling the curtain shut with shaking hands. My wife rolled onto her side, her eyes briefly flickering open. In the candlelight, they looked glassy, reflecting something I couldn't see. "They come when it notices," she whispered. Then she closed her eyes again, as if that explained everything, as if I should rest, knowing I had brought this on myself. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. All night the tapping moved from window to window, circling the house. Sometimes soft, sometimes thunderous, rattling the panes until I thought the glass would shatter. Between taps, silence pressed in, heavier than sound. And through it all, I felt their gaze, cold, unblinking, endless. When dawn broke, the tapping ceased. I gathered the courage to peek again. The yard was empty. The fields stretched gray and silent, the storm clouds breaking apart above, but the grass was pressed flat in arcs, as though dozens of feet had stood there all night. At breakfast, the family was quieter than usual. No one mentioned the watchers, but their eyes slid toward me again and again, as though checking for cracks, as though waiting to see if I had survived the night intact. Her father finally spoke, his voice rough. "You looked, didn't you?" I swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to. You never mean to," he said sharply. Then softer. "But once they know you see them, they never forget." I clenched my fists. "What do they want?" No one answered. My wife kept her gaze fixed on her plate, her hands perfectly still. Her grandmother muttered something under her breath, too quiet to catch, and the rest of the family fell silent. That night, I tried everything. Salt across the sills, cedar burning in the corners, candles lit in every shadow. But when midnight came, so did they. The tapping began again, first at the far windows, then closer. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, and though I tried not to look, I felt them pressing against the glass. Faceless and patient, I buried my head in my hands, whispering prayers I hadn't spoken since I was a child. My wife sat upright in bed this time, her eyes wide open, reflecting the candlelight like mirrors. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She only whispered one word, "Kneel," so I did. I fell to my knees on the wooden floor, pressing my forehead against the boards. The tapping grew louder, furious, as though angered by my refusal to watch. The sound rattled the room, set the mirrors shivering beneath their sheets. My teeth ached with the vibration. Hours passed like that. On my knees, head down, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. When dawn broke, the tapping stopped once more. But something had changed. The salt at the windows was gone, scattered as though swept away by unseen hands. The cedar was nothing but blackened dust, and carved faintly into the wood of the windowsill, letters thin as scratches, was a single word. Soon. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. The elders had already given their warnings. My wife had already told me what little she would. There was nothing more they could say that would save me. The watchers had seen me. And like the mirror, like the scratches at the door, they would not stop until the house decided what to do with me. That night, when I lay awake, I realized something worse than fear. It wasn't just that they watched me, it was that, deep down, some part of me felt watched even when they weren't there, and maybe that was the point. By the time the watchers came a third night, I began to realize something that terrified me more than their faceless stares. The rules didn't make sense, or maybe they did once. A long time ago, before they'd been twisted by time, by memory, by fear. But what had been handed to me, scraps of warnings, half-whispered commandments, was a tangle of contradictions. Obey one and I broke another. Listen to one elder and I defied another. It was like being told to walk two roads at once, and punished for choosing either. The first contradiction came with the cellar. One evening, as the house groaned deep and long, I dropped to my knees, pressing my forehead to the boards. My wife stood still, eyes closed, lips moving soundlessly. When the groan subsided, she opened her eyes and said, "If it groans twice, you must go to the cellar." "You wait there until it stops," I nodded, though my gut clenched. The cellar was a place I had never been allowed. Its door at the far end of the hall was always locked, the iron latch rusted but sturdy. The air near it smelled of damp and rot, and every time I passed, I felt as though something pressed against it from the other side. The next night, it groaned twice. I looked at my wife, panicked. She only pointed toward the hallway, so I obeyed. The latch opened easily, though no one had touched it. The door creaked, a groan within a groan, and the air that spilled out was cold enough to burn. I lit a candle and descended. The cellar was vast, stretching farther than the house itself, stone walls damp and glistening. Wooden shelves lined the walls, holding jars filled with things I couldn't recognize, pale shapes suspended in cloudy liquid, bundles of dried plants that looked more like withered hands than herbs. In the center was a circle of salt, unbroken, with a stool placed at its heart. I sat, clutching the candle, the silence pressing in thick. The house groaned again above, louder now, shaking dust from the beams. And from the far corner of the cellar, something shifted. I couldn't see it. The candlelight reached only so far, but I heard the scrape of something dragging across stone. I held my breath, praying, waiting. After what felt like hours, the groaning stopped. My wife's words echoed in my head. Wait until it stops. So I did. And when silence returned, I bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. The next morning, her father cornered me. His voice was sharp, his face pale with fury. "Who told you to go down there?" My mouth went dry. She did. "My wife." He shook his head violently. "You never opened that door, never." But she said, "Then she was wrong." His voice cracked. "If you go down there again, it won't let you leave." The contradiction sank in like poison. One rule demanded the cellar, another forbade it, and I was trapped between them, punished either way. The second contradiction came with the windows. Her grandmother told me one afternoon, her milky eyes fixed somewhere beyond me, "When they stand outside, do not cover the glass. They don't like to be shut out." But her uncle told me the opposite later that night, his voice trembling as he passed me in the hallway. "Always keep the curtains drawn. They hate to be seen. Which was it? Let them look or block them out. Both couldn't be true. Both couldn't be false. Yet every night since I felt them outside, waiting, and I never knew which command would damn me faster. I began to realize the family wasn't united. The rules weren't law. They were fragments of survival, each relative clinging to what had saved them once. Each rule passed down in pieces until the whole was nothing but contradictions. And in those contradictions, the house thrived. It fed on my uncertainty, my hesitation. Every choice I made was the wrong one. Bow too quickly, and the groans grew louder, mocking. Wait too long, and shadows stirred at the corners of the room. Salt at the doors one night, scattered by morning. Mirrors covered, yet still whispering my name from beneath the sheets. The worst was the night I tried to leave. I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of contradictions, the constant vigilance. I told myself I'd only step outside, breathe fresh air, feel the sky. Just for a moment. But when I opened the front door, the air outside was wrong. Too still, too heavy, as though the night had been drained of wind. The field stretched endless and gray, and the watchers were there. Dozens of them standing at the edge of the yard, faceless heads tilted toward me. I froze, the door half open, the air pressing thick against my skin. One of them stepped forward, not quickly, just one step, slow and deliberate, feet leaving no mark on the soil. And in the silence, I heard the house groan behind me. I fell to my knees, forehead pressed to the threshold, trembling. The door slammed shut on its own. When I looked up, my wife stood over me. Her face was pale, expression unreadable. "You can't leave," she said simply. "Why not?" My voice cracked. "Why can't I? What happens if I do?" Her eyes were cold, steady. "Then you don't come back." The contradictions grew sharper after that. Some rules told me to move toward sound. Others told me to hide from it. One elder said never eat after sundown. Another pressed a bowl into my hands at midnight, whispering, "If you refuse, it takes offense." I felt myself unraveling. Every choice a trap, every breath a gamble. The house wasn't just testing me, it was teaching me despair. Because in the end, it wasn't about surviving, it was about submission. It wanted me confused, desperate, broken enough to obey without question, even when the rules defied each other. It wanted me pliant, and I was breaking. The night ended with another message carved into the wall beside my bed. Thin lines, etched as though by invisible claws. Choose wrong. I stared at it for hours, candlelight flickering across the letters, realizing the truth. It didn't matter what choice I made. Wrong was inevitable, and the house was waiting for me to prove it. The first time I found the room, I didn't even know I had opened the right door. The house shifted sometimes. Hallways stretched longer than they had been. Staircases curved differently. Doors appeared where none had stood before. I had stopped trusting my memory of its layout. That night, following the faint sound of dripping water, I wandered deeper into a wing I hadn't explored. The corridor smelled of mildew and copper, heavy enough to sting the back of my throat. The door at the end was narrow, warped, its wood darkened with old stains. My hand hesitated on the handle. Some part of me screamed not to open it, but the dripping sound pulled me forward. I pushed. The room beyond was low and circular, its stone walls slick with damp. And at its center was a table. No, not a table. An altar. It was carved from black wood, gouged with deep grooves. Symbols I didn't recognize spiraled across its surface, filled with dried salt and darker stains that glistened under the candlelight. I knew blood when I saw it, old, layered, blackened in places, but blood all the same. The dripping sound came from a bucket at the altar's base. Thick red liquid collected there, slow droplets falling from above. I followed the trail upward and froze. The ceiling beams were covered in hooks. Rusted, bent, some empty, some still strung with tatters of cloth. And from one hung a darkened length of rope, frayed at the ends, still damp with something that wasn't water. My stomach twisted. I stumbled backward, but the soles of my shoes slid in something sticky. I looked down. The floor was streaked with faint red lines, trails leading from the door to the altar, as though others had been dragged here before me. My breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. I turned to flee, but the door had shut behind me, and in the silence, I heard whispers. Not the creak of the house, not the groan of the beams. Human whispers, layered, countless, overlapping, rising from the very walls. They weren't speaking words I knew. They were chanting, low and rhythmic, a pulse that filled the chamber like a heartbeat. My candle sputtered. For one terrifying moment, the flame shrank so low I thought it would die. The walls seemed to breathe in the dimness, their damp stone pulsing faintly. The chanting grew louder, and then suddenly the flame flared. Someone stood across the altar. It wasn't possible. The room had been empty, but there he was, a man, gaunt and pale, wearing clothes decades out of place. His eyes were hollow, black pits, and his mouth stretched in a thin, blood-stained line. I froze, too terrified to move, to breathe. He raised a hand, bony fingers curling as though beckoning. My legs trembled, half pulled forward, half fighting to stay back, and then I heard it. My name. Whispered in that same rasping voice I had first heard in the mirror. I bolted. The door that had been locked seconds ago flew open as though it wanted me gone. I stumbled into the hallway, slamming it shut behind me, chest heaving, sweat cold on my skin. When I returned to my room, my wife was awake, sitting upright in bed. Her eyes were calm, too calm, You found it, she said softly. I stared at her, trembling. What is it? What do you keep down there? Her gaze flickered to the mirror, still covered by its sheet. Then back to me. It isn't about keeping. It's about feeding. My blood went cold. She lay back down without another word, leaving me standing in the dark, with her meaning pressing heavy on my chest. The next morning, I confronted her father. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. There's a room. An altar, blood. What is it for? He didn't meet my eyes. That room isn't yours to enter. I already did, I snapped. I saw it. I heard them. His jaw tightened, his hand gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles whitened. Then you've invited more than you can endure. I slammed my fist on the table. Tell me what it is. Finally, his eyes rose to mine, and for the first time I saw something there I hadn't before. Not anger, not control, fear. It's the room we use when the rules aren't enough, he whispered. I staggered back, heart pounding. What do you mean? He leaned closer, his voice barely audible. Sometimes obedience doesn't appease it. Sometimes it hungers. And when it does, blood buys time, the world tilted. The floor seemed to shift beneath me. You sacrifice, I choked out. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night I couldn't close my eyes without seeing that altar. The dried stains, the hooks, the rope, and the figure across from me, whispering my name. The truth crashed over me. The rules weren't just about survival. They were a leash, a delay, a way to keep the hunger at bay until blood was offered. And I had already broken too many. I wondered if the house had already chosen me. I thought I had reached the limits of dread, that there was nothing more the house could reveal that would surprise me. I was wrong. It happened in the library again, the place where I'd first seen the rule book. Her father had taken it from me, sworn I wasn't meant to see. But the house has a way of giving back what it wants you to have, even if no one else does. I was searching the shelves aimlessly one evening, fingers trailing across the spines, when one slipped inward with a hollow click. The shelf shuddered, and a narrow gap opened. Behind it was a recess I'd never noticed before. Inside sat another book. It wasn't leather like the last, but bound in something darker, rougher, as if the cover itself had once been alive. My stomach knotted as I pulled it free.
The pages smelled of rot, and when I opened them...
The writing was darker, heavier, etched so deep into the parchment it almost tore through. At first, it was the same kind of warnings, rules scrawled in hurried, jagged lines. Do not drink from the well after dusk. Never step between twin shadows. If the child cries, though no child lives here, leave the room at once. But then I turned a page, and the air in the library seemed to change. There, written in the same hand, was my name. Not my family name. Not the name I shared with anyone else. My name, full and exact, underlined twice. Beneath it a single rule. He must not leave the house after the 13th night, or it will claim him whole. My skin prickled. My breath caught in my throat. The letters swam before my eyes, darker, sharper, as though they had been waiting for me to see them. The room seemed to tilt, the shelves pressing in. My candle flickered, shadows dancing wildly across the portraits that lined the walls. For a terrible moment, I felt as though the painted eyes had turned, staring not at the book, but at me, their gazes heavy with recognition. I slammed the book shut and stumbled back. My 13th night. I counted. This was it. The book had been written long before I was ever born. The ink faded, the pages brittle with age. And yet my name was there, etched in rules that shouldn't have known me. Panic clawed at my chest. I shoved the book back into its recess and forced the shelf closed, but it didn't matter. The words were branded into my mind, carved as deeply as they had been into the page. When I returned to our room, my wife was waiting. Sitting upright on the bed, her hands folded in her lap. Her face pale, her eyes dark. You found it, she said quietly. I froze in the doorway. You knew? She nodded once. It's always written, my mouth went dry. What does it mean? Her eyes dropped, her voice low. It means the house chose you before you ever stepped inside. It wrote you into itself. I shook my head violently. No, that's not possible. How could it? It doesn't matter how. Her voice was sharp now. It matters that it's written. And what is written happens. I felt my knees weaken. I stumbled to the chair, sinking into it, burying my face in my hands. So I was doomed the moment I married you? Her silence was answer enough. The hours crawled. Midnight came and went. I stayed awake, heart hammering, waiting for the house to move, to groan, to reveal what claiming whole meant. The watchers returned, faceless and patient outside the windows. The mirrors whispered behind their sheets. The walls creaked with voices that weren't voices, but worse was the silence between. That heavy, waiting silence, as though the house itself was holding its breath. At dawn, I staggered into the hallway, desperate for air. That was when I saw it. Across the wallpaper, carved in long, deep gouges, was my name again.
Over and over,
stretching down the hall. Each letter jagged, trembling, but unmistakable. I followed them with shaking hands, my breath ragged. They led me to the locked cellar door. The wood was scarred, the latch bent, and carved into the door itself, beneath my name, repeated a dozen times, was a single phrase, "You belong here." I ran. Back to the room, to my wife. "We have to leave," I begged. "Now, before it's too late." She looked at me with something like pity. "No one leaves." "Then come with me," I snapped, grabbing her wrist. She pulled free, eyes flashing. "If you run, it follows. If you hide, it finds. There is no leaving. The only path is obeying." Her words cracked something in me. "Obeying hasn't saved me." "Every rule contradicts the last. Every command drags me deeper. It doesn't want obedience. It wants surrender." Her silence was confirmation. That night, the 13th night, I sat awake, candles burning, salt scattered, cedar smoke choking the air. I bowed at every groan, knelt at every shift, whispered prayers to a God I wasn't sure could hear me here. At the stroke of midnight, the walls trembled. The air grew heavy, and from every direction came whispers, not layered, not chaotic this time, unified, chanting. My name.
Over and over,
rising until the sound was deafening. The floorboards beneath me cracked, splintering, bleeding dark liquid that seeped between the boards. The mirrors shuddered, their sheets tearing, glass trembling, as if something pressed against it from the other side. And in the window, the watchers stood closer than ever. Faces pressed to the glass, blank and endless, their bodies unmoving as the house roared around me. I dropped to my knees, forehead against the boards, whispering apologies, begging for mercy. But the whispers only grew louder, the name carved deeper into my skull. When the candlelight flared, I saw it. My reflection in the nearest mirror, uncovered now, standing tall, though I was kneeling. Its mouth stretched wide in a smile, and in a voice that was both mine and not, it whispered, "You were written here." The flame died, and in the darkness, the house breathed in. Sleep left me after the 13th night. It wasn't that I chose to stay awake. It was that every time I closed my eyes, the house found me. Dreams no longer belonged to me. They were corridors that bent into themselves, mirrors that multiplied my face until I didn't know which one was mine. I woke each morning more frayed than before. My hands shook, my breath came shallow. The rules circled endlessly in my head, each one contradicting the last, until I couldn't tell if I was obeying or defying. And the house seemed to sense it, tightening around me like a fist. The hallways stretched longer. Doors shifted positions. Sometimes I opened one into a room I recognized, only to find the furniture rearranged, the portraits staring with expressions that hadn't been there before. Other times, I found rooms that shouldn't exist at all, staircases leading nowhere, closets that opened into damp tunnels, windows that showed not the fields, but a black sky littered with stars I didn't recognize. The family pretended not to notice. At meals, they ate in silence, forks scraping against plates, eyes flicking toward me with something between suspicion and pity. My wife sat beside me, calm as ever, her stillness unbearable. She had accepted this life long ago. I never would. The whispers worsened. At first, they came from the walls at night. Then they followed me into the day, Soft voices echoed in my ears even in full light, sometimes my name, sometimes words I couldn't translate. Syllables that bent wrong in my mouth when I tried to repeat them. One evening, I caught my reflection in the window before I drew the curtains. It was me, but not. My reflection's lips moved, though mine were still. Its eyes gleamed darker, deeper, and when I leaned closer, it leaned closer too, whispering something I couldn't hear through the glass. I ripped the curtains shut and sank to the floor, clutching my head. The rules no longer anchored me. They mocked me. Bow when the house groans, but what if it groaned without stopping? Keep the candles lit, but what if the flames sputtered no matter how much wax I burned? The elders said to obey, but obeying only led me deeper into contradictions that left me paralyzed. The house wanted me paralyzed. One night, I wandered into the west wing, drawn by the sound of distant weeping. The halls narrowed the farther I walked, ceilings lowering, walls closing in until I had to stoop. At the end, I found a small room with a single chair. On it sat a figure, shoulders hunched, face buried in its hands. I thought it was one of the cousins at first. I reached out, laying a trembling hand on its shoulder. The head lifted slowly. It was me. My own face. Hollow-eyed, skin pale as parchment, mouth stretched in a soundless scream. I stumbled back, crashing into the wall, heart slamming. The figure didn't rise. It only stared at me with my own despair, and then it faded, melting into the air like smoke. I ran until my lungs burned, until I collapsed outside our room. My wife opened the door silently, looked down at me and whispered, "Don't follow the voices anymore." Then she shut the door again, leaving me on the floor, trembling. But how could I not follow them? They were everywhere, in the walls, in the mirrors, in the silence between groans, even in my own breath sometimes, as if I were speaking without realizing. The worst came on the 17th night. I woke to find the room different. The bed was the same, the curtains drawn, but the walls were wrong, too close, damp with dark stains that pulsed faintly like veins. My wife was gone. The door was gone. I was inside the house, not in it. The walls whispered my name in overlapping voices. The floorboard shifted beneath me, rippling like muscle. I staggered forward, and the corridor stretched infinitely, bending and curving, never ending. Shadows slid across the walls, faceless, long-limbed, brushing against me as they passed. Each touch sent ice through my skin, as though they were pulling threads of me loose. At the end of the hall, a mirror waited. I had covered every mirror in the house, but here one stood, uncovered, pristine. I saw myself in it, but again not myself. My reflection smiled. Its eyes were black voids, its lips cracked with blood. "You were written here," it whispered, the same phrase as before. "And here you will stay." I screamed and hurled the candle at the glass. The mirror shattered, shards scattering across the floor. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd won. Then each shard moved. Reflections crawled across them like insects, dozens of tiny versions of me, mouths opening in unison. The whispering rose to a roar, my name repeated again and again until it drowned out thought. I clawed at my ears, fell to my knees, begged for silence. And then, darkness. When I woke, I was in our bed again. The room was normal. The door was there. My wife lay beside me, eyes open, watching. "You saw too much," she said softly. I turned to her, tears streaking my face. "Tell me how to stop this, please." Her expression didn't change. "You don't stop it. You endure it." I shook my head. I can't anymore." Her lips curved faintly, almost sad. "Then it will take you." The next days blurred. Time lost meaning. The clocks ticked at different speeds. The sun rose and set at impossible hours. I ate without tasting, slept without resting. The family's voices grew distant. Their faces blurred when I tried to focus. The only thing clear was the house. Its whispers, its rules, its contradictions. They filled me until I could no longer tell where I ended and the house began. Sanity was a rope, fraying strand by strand, and I could feel the last fibers snapping. The house didn't want my life. It wanted my mind, and it was winning. I didn't believe there could be a last rule. The house seemed endless, its commands infinite, shifting, contradictory. But when it came, I felt it before I read it. The night was heavy, the air thick with storm. The family gathered in the dining hall, though no one ate. Candles burned low, wax dripping in long threads, shadows pooling along the walls. I noticed how each of them kept their heads bowed, lips moving in silent recitation. Even my wife. I sat at the table, trembling, waiting. Her grandmother's voice broke the silence. "It is written." The words fell like a stone in water, rippling through the hall. No one lifted their gaze. Her father's hands clenched against the table. My wife closed her eyes. "What does that mean?" I whispered. Her grandmother turned her blind eyes toward me. "The final rule has been given." The air shifted. My skin prickled. I felt it before they handed me the object. A torn scrap of parchment, edges blackened. Words carved deep into the fibers as though burned in. I unfolded it with shaking hands. It was short, simple. I read it once, twice, and each time the letters seemed darker, heavier. The one who was written must choose. Blood of kin or blood of self. I stared at the words until my vision blurred. My throat went dry, my chest hollow. "What does this mean?" I demanded. My voice cracked with terror. No one answered. I slammed my hand on the table. "Tell me." Her father finally looked at me, eyes dark and hollow. "It means what it says. If you refuse, the house will choose for you." I felt the room tilt. My stomach churned. "No, I won't. I can't." My wife's voice cut through, steady, calm. "It must be obeyed." I turned to her, desperate. "You're asking me to kill? To sacrifice?" Her face didn't change. "The house asks." "Not us," I wanted to scream, to run. But I knew what would happen if I fled. The watchers would follow. The mirrors would open. The house would stretch its walls until escape was only another corridor, another trap. The final rule was not avoidable. It was a verdict. That night, I locked myself in our room, pacing like a caged animal. My wife lay still on the bed, calm, as though she had known this would come all along. I begged her for answers, for guidance, but she gave me none. "It has always been this way," she whispered finally. "Every outsider is written. Every outsider is asked. And what happens to them?" I choked out. She didn't answer. I thought of the portraits in the halls, grooms with hollow eyes, brides with gleaming stares. I thought of the altar in the ritual room, the hooks, the stains. I thought of the scratches on my door, the word seen, the whispers in the walls. The house wanted blood. By dawn, my hands shook so badly I could hardly light a candle. I tried to think of ways out. Could I take my own life before the house decided? Would that be defiance or obedience? Would it accept me, or would it still take her? The contradictions tore at me. My mind frayed further. That evening, the family gathered again. My wife stood at my side, silent, while her father placed a knife on the table before me. Its blade was dark, old, the hilt worn smooth by countless hands. "The house waits," he said. I stared at the blade until my reflection bent across it, warped and grinning. "Why me?" I whispered. Her grandmother leaned closer, her blind eyes white and glistening. "Because you married into us. Because you were written." My breath shuddered. My hands trembled as I lifted the knife. The weight of it was unbearable. Blood of kin or blood of self. The words echoed in my head. I looked at my wife. She didn't flinch. Her eyes were steady, accepting, as if she knew, as if she had always known this moment would come. I thought of leaving. I thought of plunging the knife into my chest to end it on my terms. But the house groaned then, deep and long, vibrating through the floor, rattling the walls. The candles bent toward me, their flames stretching unnaturally high. It was waiting. I dropped to my knees, knife clattering against the stone. I wept, begging for another way, another chance. But the rules never gave choices, only ultimatums. That night I walked the halls with the knife in my hand, the house whispering at my heels. The portraits watched, their eyes gleaming in the candlelight. The mirrors whispered, my reflection grinning. The watchers pressed close at the windows, faceless and patient, and the house groaned again. The final rule pulsed in my skull. Blood of kin or blood of self? I don't know how long I wandered. Hours, days, it felt the same. My mind fractured under the weight of it. At last, I found myself in the ritual room again. The altar waited, stained and scarred. The hooks above swayed as though moved by breath. The whispers rose, layered, chanting, pulling me forward. I staggered to the center, knife trembling in my grip. The circle of salt had been broken. The stool overturned. The bucket beneath dripped fresh. The house didn't care who I chose. It only cared that I chose, and as I raised the knife, sobbing, I understood the truth. The rules had never been about protection. They had been about feeding every bough, every candle, every whisper. They were rituals to keep me compliant until the house demanded what it truly wanted: blood. The final rule was only the last mask it wore. I don't know if I made the choice, or if the house made it for me. The knife felt welded to my hand, its weight dragging at my bones. The ritual room was alive with whispers, pressing against my skull from every direction. My own voice echoed among them sometimes, chanting my name back at me. Blood of kin, or blood of self. The words pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I thought of plunging the knife into my chest, ending it before the house could claim more. I even raised the blade, pressing the cold steel against my skin. But the house groaned then, a deep, furious roar that rattled the hooks above and shook dust from the ceiling. The blade slipped from my throat. My hands refused to obey. It didn't want me dead yet. I stumbled back, choking on sobs, and the whispers shifted. They pressed images into my mind, flashes of my wife lying pale and still, of her eyes turning black, of the portraits in the hall with grooms hollowed out beside glowing brides. Blood of kin, I screamed, covering my ears, but the images wouldn't stop. My wife standing calm in the bedroom doorway, waiting. My wife lying on the altar, still and silent, blood dripping from her wrists to feed the floor. I staggered out of the ritual room, the knife still clutched in my fist, the whispers following. The hallways twisted, lengthened, bent. Doors appeared and vanished. The house wanted me lost, wanted me stumbling toward her, and I did. I don't remember crossing the halls. I don't remember climbing the stairs. All I remember is the bedroom door before me, the knife in my hand and my wife standing inside, waiting. Her face was calm, her eyes steady. "It's time," she whispered. I shook my head violently, tears burning down my cheeks. "No, I can't, I won't. You must," she said softly. "That's the rule." My knees buckled. I dropped to the floor, clutching the knife like it was both anchor and curse. Why me? Why does it have to be me? Her silence was answer enough. The house groaned again, louder than ever, the walls trembling, the ceiling bowing. Candles guttered and flared, shadows stretching until they swallowed the corners of the room. She stepped closer, slowly, deliberately. "It won't stop until you choose." Her hand brushed mine, closing gently around the blade. Her eyes held no fear, only inevitability. I tried to drop the knife. My fingers wouldn't let go. The whispers roared louder, shaking the walls, rising in a single word: choose. And in that moment, I realized something worse than death. The choice wasn't about survival. The choice was the sacrifice. The house didn't care whose blood spilled, only that I obeyed the rule. Only that I bent myself into its will, surrendered fully, body and soul. The knife trembled in my hand. My wife leaned closer, her lips brushing my ear. "Better me than you." My chest collapsed into sobs. I pressed the blade against my palm instead, slicing deep, blood spilling across the floor. Pain seared through me, but I didn't stop. I let it flow, crimson drops pattering against the wood. The whispers hushed. The house groaned once, long and deep, like a satisfied breath. My wife caught my wrist, pulling the knife free, her eyes wide. "You chose yourself." I collapsed to the floor, clutching my bleeding hand. The salt I'd scattered across the doorway earlier hissed as blood touched it, the grains dissolving into dark stains. For a moment, silence fell, and then the floor shuddered. The blood didn't stay on the boards. It spread, thin and dark, drawn into the cracks like veins. The wood pulsed beneath me, sucking it down, drinking. The house wasn't done. My wife knelt beside me, her face unreadable. "It won't let you stop there. It will take until you're empty." The whispers rose again, faint but insistent, chanting my name, demanding more. I staggered to my feet, knife still clutched in my trembling hand. I didn't know where to go, what to do. Every corridor bent back to the ritual room. Every shadow pressed me closer to the altar. The portrait's eyes gleamed as I passed, the bride's faces alight, the groom's hollow. The house wanted me hollow. I reached the ritual room again without knowing how. The altar waited, the bucket filling with fresh drips. The whispers pressed harder, demanding, coaxing, blood of kin or blood of self. I raised the knife again, tears blinding me. I thought of my wife's calm acceptance, her steady gaze. I thought of the family eating in silence, bound to the same rules, surviving on borrowed time, and I thought of myself trapped, written into a fate I'd never chosen. With a ragged scream, I slashed the blade across my arm. Blood spilled freely, splattering the altar. The whispers roared in ecstasy. The house shuddered, walls vibrating, ceiling beams groaning, my vision dimmed, my body weakened. The knife slipped from my fingers, clattering against the floor. I collapsed onto the altar, blood pooling beneath me, the wood drinking it greedily. The whispers slowed, softened, until they were no more than a hum, and then silence. The house was satisfied, for now. I lay there trembling, vision fading in and out. My wife stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes unreadable. She stepped closer, touched my face with a hand that was both tender and cold. "You chose," she whispered. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. No words came. She leaned closer, her lips brushing my ear once more. But no outsider survives the choice. Darkness closed over me. When I woke, the house was quiet. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, deliberate, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. My body ached, weak and trembling. My arm was bound in cloth, stiff with dried blood. Someone had wrapped me, not with care, with duty. The ritual room was empty. The altar stained darker than before. The bucket below it filled nearly to the brim. I tried to stand, but my legs barely obeyed. My head spun, my vision flickered. Every breath came shallow, ragged. I stumbled into the hall, each step echoing louder than it should, as if the house were listening. The family was waiting in the dining hall. They sat as they always did, in silence, candles flickering, shadows pressing deep. Their eyes turned to me as I entered, hollow and searching. My wife sat among them, her hands folded neatly, her face calm. Her father rose slowly. "It is done," he said. I swallowed hard, my throat raw. What happens now?" He studied me for a long moment. "Now you endure, if you can." The words struck me harder than any blow. Endure, not survive, not escape. Endure. I wanted to scream at them, to demand answers, to tear the house down brick by brick. But I had no strength. And the truth was worse. Even if I had strength, it wouldn't matter. The house was stronger, older, hungrier. For days I drifted like a ghost. The rules pressed closer, heavier than before. The groans of the house shook me to my knees. The mirrors whispered my name more insistently. The watchers stood closer to the windows, their blank faces pressed almost against the glass. Everywhere I turned, I felt the weight of my choice. Blood of self. My veins still ached, my arm throbbed, my body weaker by the hour. The house had taken its fill, but I knew, deep in my marrow, that it wasn't finished. It never was. The family carried on as though nothing had changed. Meals continued. Candles burned. Rules were followed. But their eyes lingered on me longer now, as if measuring how much time I had left. One evening, I walked the halls alone. The portraits watched as always, their eyes sharp. For the first time, I noticed something I had never dared to look at before. At the very end of the gallery was a portrait covered in cloth. The frame was massive, the fabric heavy, moth-eaten in places. I don't know what compelled me, but I reached up with trembling hands and pulled the cloth away. The painting beneath made my blood freeze. It was me. Not exactly as I was, but close enough. My face, my eyes hollow, my skin pale. Beside me stood my wife, her face bright, her eyes gleaming. The paint was old, cracked, faded, but it was unmistakable. I staggered back, heart slamming. The canvas hadn't been painted recently. It had been there for years, decades, maybe longer. The house had written me long before I ever arrived. I fled back to our room, clutching my head, whispering to myself that it wasn't real, that it couldn't be real. But when I opened the door, my wife was waiting, sitting calmly on the bed. "You've seen it," she said softly. Tears burned in my eyes. "How? How is it possible?" Her gaze didn't waver. "The house always knows. It always writes. We are only living what has already been painted." I shook my head violently. "No, I won't. I won't end like them." Her expression softened. Pity, maybe, or resignation. "You already have." That night I dreamed of the altar again. Of blood dripping endlessly, filling the bucket, overflowing. Of my reflection smiling in every shard of glass, whispering, written, bound, chosen. When I woke, my wife was gone. The bed beside me, cold, untouched. I searched the house, stumbling through its endless halls, calling her name. The family ignored me, their eyes averted, their lips moving in silent prayer. I found her at the cellar door. She stood before it, her hand resting lightly on the latch. Her eyes were calm, her voice steady. "It will take me next," she said. "No," I begged, staggering forward. "Not you. It was me. I chose myself." Her lips curved faintly, almost sad. The house never stops at one. The latch creaked. The door groaned. Darkness spilled from the cellar like smoke. She stepped inside without looking back. The door shut behind her, leaving me alone in the hall, shaking, broken. I pressed my ear against the wood, straining to hear. Whispers rose from below, layered and endless. But this time they weren't saying my name. They were saying hers. I don't know how long I stayed there, listening. When I finally staggered away, the house felt different. Quieter. Not satisfied, but patient. It had taken from me. It had taken from her, and it would take again. The rules hadn't saved me. They hadn't protected anyone. They were only the rituals of a family chained to a hunger older than memory, a hunger that never ended. I wander the halls now, weaker each day, the mirrors whispering, the watchers pressing closer. My name is still carved into the walls, but hers is spreading now too, etched fresh each night. I know what will happen. I've seen the portraits. I've seen the altar. I've seen myself painted before I ever lived it. This isn't a story of survival. It's a story of endurance, a story of feeding something that can never be fed enough. The house stands at the edge of the fields, patient and watching. It waits for the next vow, the next binding, the next outsider written into its walls. And when they come, as they always do, the rules will be waiting. The rules no outsider should know.